second. Okay, so thanks for hanging around. I'm just going to do it like this, I think. I'm working Keynote off an iPad, so it's been quite adventurous. Thanks for hanging around, especially if you've sort of travelled from Australia, as some of you have, and you know we all look like we've been hit by a truck with jet lag. But I'd love to take the opportunity right now to speak to you about AR and VR advocacy and how to train your champions. And this is really, I guess, a bit of a in the trenches experience. I have been around the augmented reality world ever since I fell in love with it circa 2011. Read a Mashable article about Dacry at the time, actually, who wanted to be the YouTube of the augmented reality world. And I thought, YouTube, that's a big platform. Augmented reality, let me check it out. So I've been in love ever since, and I've been out there pitching it to many, I've been to agencies, I've been to brand CMOs. So yeah, really what I want to convey to you today is the culmination of that experience, a bit of a brain dump. So questions that stop VR advocates, AR and VR advocates. So inevitably, and this may sound oversimplified, but these are the things that often just stop AR conversations straight up. So people have to download an app. That one shut me down 5 times in a row until I figured out how to answer it, which I'll tell you in a sec. How do you make people download an app? And does AR work? And who else has done it? And how much does it cost? And what would you suggest we do creatively? Because ultimately, often in first conversations, you get put on the spot to come up with something right then and there. These are the sort of people that stop AR advocates. Incumbent media and creative agencies who can take greater share of wallet from products they know how to produce and can sell at much higher margins. If it ain't broke, don't fix it sort of mentality, making hay while the sun shines. If they're making a lot of money, why go and learn this new medium? Why potentially have to outsource it a bunch of times before they get an in-house facility? Stakeholders who are too junior or afraid to suggest change within their organisation. It's a big proposition, especially when you don't have all those case studies, when you're not Nielsen accredited and, you don't have some established media metrics around the eyeballs that you will inevitably get with an AR app. Marketers are conditioned for reach and not engagement. They really are. I mean, if you look at programmatic buying now, that's such a hot topic in the marketing and advertising world. The nature of programmatic buying is just sheer volume. I saw a slide just earlier today that shows that you're more likely to get hit by lightning than have someone click through your web banner. That world just, it blows my mind, and I'll speak to that in a little while. Marketers, this is really where augmented reality has kind of suffered in the early days. Because often it was pushed by agencies as a campaign tool, not as a media platform. So it's often I find that marketers see it as they see apps as expensive web pages, and they feel like no one would engage with their brand on a mobile device unless their ad popped up during Angry Birds. So there's this attitude like it's too hard. It's too hard to get our audience's attention. It's so much easier just to put it in the hands of a mobile ad-serving platform. And stakeholders who are labouring under misinformation about what AR is. There is so much misinformation out there, and I'll talk to that as well. So, people have to download an app. Shock horror. No, not another app. Another branded app. But brand apps, I figured this out after a while. I was like, why are they so jaded about apps? And I was like, wait up, let me just look at some of these branded apps. They're like books. They're content heavy. You read them from cover to cover. They might have an ATM finder or something like that. Maybe find your nearest car dealer. But ultimately, they are just pieces of content. So much like on the left there, when you buy a book to go on holiday, you read it from cover to cover. And after you're finished with it, you put it back on the right there, which is your bookshelf. It's your digital bookshelf. And it wanders to your second screen, third screen, fourth screen. And if like 96% of Australians every 12 months, your app is on the fourth screen, they'll just wipe it off. They'll spring clean all the apps off their device. In fact, often these days it's happening quicker and quicker, that people are just reading it going, that was cool, thanks, bang, delete. No more utility. So it really is a single use piece, these traditional content heavy apps. But augmented reality applications are portals. They're browsers, really. They're more like the Safari icon. They really are worlds of limitless content. Don't say that when you submit your app to AR app to Apple, by the way, because don't call it a browser. They will reject it. But I've had that happen. But really, what this is, and I say to people, imagine a magazine. When you create a magazine, you find your audience, you develop the right content for that audience, and then you build that audience. You take time and you invest in building that audience. You actually create a conversation. And I guess speaking back to the whole idea of ad agencies doing campaigns, one-off campaigns, this is really a media platform. And really the conversations we have with customers now are not just what are you going to do in your first campaign, and yeah, it's got to be awesome, great call to action, it's got to be mind-blowing, but what are you going to do in your first 5 campaigns? And what's the 5th campaign going to look like 12 months from now? The other thing that a lot of people don't realise, everyone's going nuts about beacons and proximity, but the SDKs for beacons and proximity need to sit underneath an application. And that application has to have enough ongoing utility to remain on the device. If they delete the app, then the link to those beacons, which could be a massive hardware rollout across a retailer, is broken. So augmented reality applications, even if the only content you put out there is extremely entertaining, allows you to then run these other interest sensing capabilities underneath. It allows you to run your beacons underneath. You just need to keep putting out these touch points to consumers enough that they go, I'm not going to delete this AR app because I keep seeing these great offers and discounts and calls to action. Then you can run your other technology that is app specific. How do you make people download an app? Always blows my mind when I talk to agencies and marketers. Well, just use marketing and advertising. Just literally use like direct marketing principles. Use fear, greed, guilt, anger, exclusivity. What's on the other side of this is exclusive. I'm going to give you a taste of it. It's actually an exclusive interview with so-and-so from this film. You can't see it anywhere else. Don't just take your MP4 off your website and go, here you go, can you attach that to an ad? And we'll put a tiny little call to action down in the bottom corner. It's just not going to work. So literally just putting these principles, in there, like use, save, money, guarantee, love, results, things that speak to people, that make people curious about what is on the other side. And then when they're curious about what's on the other side, friction isn't a problem. Friction completely is not even felt as friction because people will go through whatever they need to go through to get to engaging content. The other thing is call to action, and I have to give kudos to Blipper. They really get buy-in for the call to action. On the left here we have Match of the Day magazine, which was the cover was all about their first inaugural Blipper campaign. And then on the right, we have in the top right corner there's a tiny little red dot that says something like, this is a 3D cover. What does that mean? How is it going to get people to actually engage? It's about getting that buy-in from the brands to not pull any punches. And if they won't actually buy in, don't do it. Because ultimately, you're not going to get those metrics. You're not going to get that engagement. Does AR work? Well, I always say, does TV? And look, this is a great scene. I'll see if the sound plays. Yeah.
You should be comfortable. Everything's here. There's a TV if you get bored.
Oh, television. Yeah, I saw that Darky Johnson's place years ago. Yep, that's what I saw.
And that's what it's like.
Right.
People go, yeah, I've seen AR. I go, really? You've seen AR? I had it the other day. I was with the CMO of a large financial company. She said, I've done AR. And I went, really? She went, yeah, when I was at this telco before, in big telco in Australia. I went, oh, okay. What did it look like? She went, oh, it was about phone visualization. And I went, was it a Samsung Galaxy S3 that hung above a page and was test flighted onto 2 devices? Because I did that. She went, oh, really? You did that? And I went, yeah. And then I'm thinking, she thinks she's done AR because she's like literally made a phone float above a page. They never tested it with users. They never put it in their 5 million run catalog. Crazy. So really, I say to people, does TV work? Well, TV both works and it doesn't work. If you put good content on it, yeah, it totally works. If you put bad content on it, it works against you. It's the same with augmented reality. If you put pedestrian content in there, buy now buttons or whatever, it's just people are going to go, you wasted my time, I'm not coming back. And if it's app driven, then they're going to distrust your app. It's a big problem with some of the big apps out there and their publishing platforms, is all that pedestrian content that's been put out there. But yeah, it works. When it's done right, it works. This is a case study that we actually did with Netapp. So we did this campaign at the Gartner conference at the end of last year. Gartner conference, there were 1,500 delegates, most of whom were C-level technology executives, usually pretty, augmented reality, God, I've heard about that and I've been there, done that. But we actually had 1/3 of all the people that were at the conference, 523 delegates, download the app just for the event. We actually leveraged a bunch of different technologies. So we actually had geofencing, we had Bluetooth beacon. As you walked past the large augmented reality piece, it actually brought up a push notification. And then it was one click, camera on, turn, and experience happened. The 2.5 meter tall by 5 meter wide banner was actually all about the call to action, was there to engage with it. So we had the client, we actually had people enter their details. They wanted 21 leads. We generated 250 qualified leads, 87 of which were C-level, the highest level executives, which for Netapp, they were CTOs and CIOs, so perfect client for them. We had 3,400 interactions over 2.5 days of the event and over 12 hours of dwell time, eyes on screen on brand engagement, which is the unique metric of the augmented reality world, mind you. That's something no other media platform has, to actually know very succinctly that someone was absolutely looking at that, for the moment, printed graphic, natural feature tracking marker. That's a huge metric. And of course, Accenture, and thank goodness people are starting to do some studies, and there's some great studies coming out of the industrial sector as well, around increased buying consideration. So, fantastic report from Accenture, people saying that, yeah, this helps. And I often say 3 of the best industries for augmented reality are telcos, cloud computing, and financial companies. That sounds completely against what you would think with FMCG and automotive and all that sort of thing, but these are companies that have products that are extremely hard to visualize. If you can create new ways to visualize these products, to visualize what is the cloud and what is a hybrid cloud and how does it work, augmented reality allows you to show people things in ways that increase understanding and certainly, as I'll speak to in a sec, increase retention. So who else is doing it? I'm going to skip through this because we all know we're here at the at AWE, but many, many brands, and kudos to IKEA, 3rd year in a row. Don't know what they're going to do without Matteo. But anyway, how much does it cost? Well, profit is to revenue what reach is into engagement, I like to say. And really, when you look at what brands are paying, this is metric infographic from Australia. You look at some of those benchmarks, 13 cents to 40 cents cost per view down the bottom for YouTube. You look at what all these platforms are charging for this engagement. Really, I guess there are ways to generate, there are many different ways to skin the cat that is augmented reality. There are many ways to leverage how you charge a client. But also, much going back to TV, it will deliver to you what you put into it. The more you invest, if you're with capable augmented reality sort of people, the more it is likely to deliver. It's just a basic metric like that. And finally, what could we do creatively? Put you on the spot. So this is the thing, right, is that we have grown up watching television, we have grown up watching films, and when we dream and when we imagine things, we almost imagine things like the same way that cameras move on a dolly. We imagine close-ups and panning shots, and we're so conditioned to see things as we see them on 2D multimedia. So to think in 3 dimensions is kind of, we don't absorb a lot of content in 3 dimensions. So I call a lot of creatives I come across cubic creatives, because they're literally about framing the shot. And they're like, and how do I do a close-up? And I go, just lean the device towards the page. And they go, oh, wow. And it just gets bigger. That control over the space, and it's been mentioned here today, really lends itself to what I call the Brook creative, after Peter Brook, who's one of the greatest theatre directors of the 20th century, English theatre director. And I talk about a lot of terminology in the augmented space in terms of theatre terminology, like the fourth wall, and I think that really that's something that is lacking out there in the creative industries, is being able to actually picture, like actually giving that control over to the end user, because the end user has this theatre in the round experience. The backdrop can change, and that can contextually change the meaning for them. They could be looking at a Sudanese African child who's asking for $5 a week, and the backdrop is their lounge room with their kids playing happily, and they're like, God, look at my kids, they're so happy, I will donate now. So not being able to control the way that your brand is actually overlaid on the world is quite scary for brands. And putting the camera in the hands of the consumer as well is scary for brands, but for the consumer, it's really empowering. The fact that they can physically, orally, and visually interrogate the scene is it gives that feeling of transparency, but more than anything else, it makes them move. And when people move, they remember. There's a lot of studies into the fact that neural synapses are more strongly created when you have more of your senses involved. I've done sort of VR iPad experiences where I don't allow you to toggle the screen, and people actually have to stand up, and they go, so I have to stand up? And I go, yes, you have to, but once they do stand up, they try to walk, and of course, until we actually have RGBD cameras on our devices, they can't actually walk through the room. But the chance that they are going to remember that experience once they have engaged with it kinetically is much, much higher. In fact, they've started to form a kinesthetic memory and a spatial relationship to the object or scene that they actually watched in augmented reality. So really, ultimately, what I do, we have 250 client-facing people at my company, and we work with most of Australia's largest brands. So giving those people who aren't augmented reality savvy, and they don't know this, I guess with augmented reality, there is so many limitations about connectivity and device power, CPU and GPU and all this sort of thing. But really, where there's that form, there's also limitless freedom within the form. But I can't give that to my salespeople to go out with. So I give them formats. I say, just go out and sell a virtual assistant. At an expo, this virtual assistant never runs out of energy. 3:30 in the afternoon, they're not dying for a coffee, and they will be on script every single time. Or maps. Go and find companies with maps that the maps need to be updated in real time. I just send my salespeople out and go and find map companies. Don't sell anything else. Don't tell them about jumping rabbits and all that sort of thing. Just sell maps. So if you create these formats, even just 360s, even something like this, the Ricoh Theta 360. I'm going to take a little 360 to finish up. There we go. But creating 360 panos and connecting to them through AR, it's something people don't often see online. Create that unique content, give salespeople formats, and you'll find that brands will jump on board. We are having brands jump on board. There's more momentum than ever out there. And really, it's because the conversation to those brands is becoming real. It's not becoming about just doing something flippant. Thank you.
Thank you, David. So we have time for questions now.
What projects are you working on? Like, what interesting projects are you working on?
What projects are we working on? So we're currently rolling out a whole bunch of campaigns for a multinational kids entertainment company, and they're actually loving it because because we use print markers, and they've never been able to actually regulate the print assets that go out all over the world. It's making all the different offices supply their print assets to us in order to connect up the AR, and they're able to manage their brand in a way that they were never able to do before. So, yeah, it's bizarre, but they're actually getting buy-in to create a digital assets management platform through augmented reality, where they could never get that buy-in before. So we're doing that, but we're also we're working with many different verticals, and sometimes we sort of work with there's great ways that you can kind of almost dump the traditional AR and augment things by being able to tap a screen and unlock a game and use proximity technology. So we're kind of using lots of different things, but yeah, and ultimately we're trying to build products for brands that they can use many times over.
Great. Nicole Lazaro from Zio Design. Great presentation. Really loved it.
Cheers.
I was really curious about in selling an AR experience. What would you say was your most challenging, sale in a sense, and what strategy did you use to close it?
What was my most challenging sale? I guess. What was the most challenging sale? You know what? It's actually when you come up against IT people inside organisations, and they start freaking out because you basically represent a platform and they don't know where the servers are and all that sort of stuff. If you can convince the IT people that you still need their boxes and you can actually house the assets on their box and that the cloud-based image reco can happen on Vuforio's servers or whatever, but the assets, they hold the assets. Learning to deal with IT people is, I think, key to closing a sale. And also to get buy-in behind this at the most senior level, because I had a girl from a large toy company, and I gave her a presentation. We'd done a whole bunch of storyboards. She fell in love with it completely and said, "Can I have it on a USB? I'm going to present to the CEO and CFO in the next hour." And then she didn't call for 2 weeks, and I finally got on the phone, and what I found out is she wasn't prepared for that question, so it needs to be delivered by an app. And the CFO shot her down. And there's a lot of marketers out there who actually love augmented reality, but they've tried to pitch it in and they've had their hearts broken. And they feel like, so there's a lot of advocates out there already. It's just that they're afraid that when they go back in, they're going to be made to look silly, Hi.
I'm here.
I think along the same lines, it's I guess showing that cost-benefit analysis, which is kind of like a big trip up, because when you talk about IT people, they're like, well, how much is it going to cost, and what kind of return are we going to see? I mean, those are like huge hurdles, and coming from the creative side, it's hard to really show that data.
Yeah, I've been into big media agencies and they've said to me, I can buy a banner on a wall in this big shopping centre in Bondi Junction in Sydney and it will guarantee me 100,000 eyeballs. How can you guarantee me 100,000 eyeballs? Those metrics are the hardest thing to fight. I always say to people, eyeballs are a proximity metric and have nothing to do with engagement. And in fact, if you really want to pump your figures up, it should be strands of hair, because then you could really get your figures up in more zeros. But unfortunately, it's such an accepted thing that eyeballs are what all of media revolves upon at the moment. Eyeballs and impressions. But I think the CIOs and CTOs of the world are actually doing us a great service where they're starting to question the marketers and say, what is this eyeball that you talk about, and how is that actually creating engagement for the brand? CTOs and CMOs are, really starting to cross paths, but it is really hard. It's really hard to break that reach mentality,
Great presentation over here in the middle.
Hi.
Hey, thank you. I'm just curious if there's a favorite project AR implementation that you've seen out there that your company didn't do that you maybe wish you had done.
Oh, put on the spot. Only because I've seen so many augmented reality campaigns. YouTube was my training ground. I would say, oh God, really hard to say on the spot. I mean, look, I personally love IKEA. I know I mentioned it, so it's low-hanging fruit. I don't understand why they're not doing flat pack furniture. I've got a flat pack furniture demo we do, and every time I show it to a marketer, they go out to IKEA. Go now, you will save marriages. So I like IKEA, I just think it's unfinished. And if someone else has a chance to go in and see the IKEA people over in Scandinavia, in Sweden, do flat pack. That is actually the killer application. A year and a bit ago, I went into Apple in Sydney and was introduced to a senior guy there. And he said, Dave, I'm not really convinced about augmented reality. Let's have lunch and you can change my mind. So we sat there and I showed him a bunch of our demos. And when we got to the flat pack, which is actually how to put together a flat pack barbecue, he just went, that's it. That's it. Stop everything else. Stop all the marketing and fluffy stuff, which I can't do because that's what my company kind of does, and just do flat pack furniture, how to construct stuff. That now I understand augmented reality. Now I can kind of see the future. And then he had a box of our brochures delivered the next day, and then we got calls from people who'd been to Apple conferences and seen the flat pack barbecue, which is interesting when you think about Matthias' acquisition. And I personally think Apple have got a big industrial bent coming. But yeah, I think I'd say okay. There's so many. It's hard to say. So many favourites. But I'm a fanboy, so.
Obviously, you may not be able to share the information, but like from the analytical data you guys collect and the application you built so far, what type of AR experience is the most popular and has the longest user engagement?
The longest user engagement, which I think colloquially in the industry called down the rabbit hole, is experiences where, something that's always super powerful is 360 panos. I mean, I mentioned it at the end there. They're so simple, and yet for people they feel like augmented reality, and you can, with Color Pano, host them on a URL and just drill through to them from the AR experience, and people just love them, and they will stay inside them for a long period of time. Connect them to the accelerometer and gyro and allow them to look up and down and everything, and yeah, that's probably the experience that we get the biggest reaction from on a simple level. Otherwise, it's games, of course. Gamification. A friend was recently telling me he built a platform for a big retailer here in the US off packaging, and it was like a shoot them down sort of game. And he said his 11-year-old son regularly played, he timed him for about 45 minutes holding an iPad. So that speaks to that whole thing about friction. If the content is good, there is no friction. People, if they're engaged, your arms don't get tired.
The Royal Adelaide Hospital in South Australia is one of the most advanced hospitals. How have they used AR in regards to like different use cases, and how they utilize AR to enhance experiences or create more immersion?
I don't know a lot about them, but I do know at Flinders University in Adelaide there is an amazing augmented reality lab, which I'm sure Mark Billinghurst over there probably works with them, and they hosted ISMA a little while back. But of course, everyone, there's some really amazing stuff being done with ODG eyewear around the surgical environment. And even my first ARE 2012, some of the guys from Stanford were here from the School of Anatomy, and at that point they'd already built an augmented reality team. So God knows where they're at now, 4 years down the track. I think that augmented reality in the medical environment is, there's a lot of full-on compliance around it. I mean, if the tracking is off just the slightest bit and you're relying upon it, and a doctor who's sharing your POV over in New York, cardiothoracic surgeon or whatever, is going, cut that, and you cut the wrong one. I mean, yeah, it's a problem. But then Dom, who's here from Current, they've done a fantastic application for MRIs. Kids that, it's augmented reality of sorts, but what they did is, do you mind if I give you your speech, Dom? But no, what they did is they actually created a game. They found that kids, when they go into MRIs, they squirm about, and if they squirm too much, then you actually have to book them in like a week later, and then you have to sedate them, and it's all traumatic and expensive. So they created a game where it's actually a game, it's a little bit like Temple Run, and the kids get a little Bluetooth beacon clicker, and they have to lie there, and the iPad gets put on the side of the table above them, and it uses the front-facing camera as a motion detector. And they actually, in order to make their monkey not actually fall off the path, they have to be perfectly still and just use the little clicker. Don't stumble, what's it called? Don't stumble, tumble. And the data is fed back to the clinic, to the MRI clinic, and when they can see the child can lie still enough, they give the parents a call and go, he's ready, bring him in. And then they play the game in there, and the child's perfectly still apart from one thumb, and yeah, and obviously it's, first hit, every time for children going into MRIs. That's a version of augmented reality, but I think that's just brilliant. And I think the more people that build those sort of products that solve real-world problems, it gives a lot of kudos to our industry.
This is the last question we have time for.
Hi. How do you see the market of PO point of interest outside and inside in augmented reality?
Point of interest, so accelerometer connected augmented reality, kind of the first that was around things hanging in the air, northwest, south.
Yeah, like here having the whole exhibitor place and finding the places, the different...
I think that is, it's a version of augmented reality. And I think wayfinding is certainly a really big industry. There's actually a lot of augmented reality people looking into visual wayfinding. Of course, IL411 with Project Tango. One of the problems, of course, they encounter is that you have an organically changing environment. You can have like aisles that have high reflectivity and all that sort of thing. So I think that the visual computing wayfinding was still a way off, and we need RGBD cameras in all the devices to do it. But there's some other great technologies out there, proximity technologies that are around, and I think actually the wayfinding market, indoor wayfinding market, Google have the outside, indoor is about to explode. And I've always believed, as I said with the beacons and proximity, wayfinding and proximity and augmented reality are fantastic bedfellows, and not a lot of people have spotted that. To be told you are beside something amazing, you go, oh, am I? Click, bang, consumer packaged goods. And actually a great use case is tell half the story off the front of the packet and then go to see the rest of the story, just turn over to the back. You make people reach out and pick it up. On a psychology of touch basis, like a haptic psychology basis, when we touch a product, we are 80% more likely to buy it. So you tell people they're right beside something, you give them half the story, you give them the rest of the story off the back, and they're really likely to actually put that product. And in fact, the story off the back is really hard to view because it's like a horizontal marker, and they're kind of like, I'll put it in and I'll try it at home because I don't have a table in the aisle. Little tricks, you know, yeah.
Thank you very much, David. David Francis, BlueStar.